I don't usually share stuff like this, but I need to get this off my chest. It happened a few months ago when I went to stay at my brother's house for a weekend. My brother Mike had just moved into a new place and invited me over to hang out and help him with some unpacking. I thought it would be a nice break from my boring routine, so I agreed. Mike's new house is in a quiet neighborhood, kind of far from the city. It's a 2-story house with big windows and a spacious backyard. When I got there, I noticed how peaceful everything was. It was a sunny afternoon, and the only sounds were birds chirping and leaves rustling in the breeze. Mike greeted me at the door with a beer and a big smile. We spent the day moving boxes, setting up furniture, and catching up on life. As evening approached, we ordered some pizza and decided to watch a movie. Mike had this big flat-screen TV in the living room, and we settled in for the night. After a couple of movies and a few more beers, we called it a night. Mike went upstairs to his bedroom, and I was supposed to sleep in the guest room downstairs. The guest room was nice and cozy, with a queen-sized bed and a window that looked out onto the backyard. I got ready for bed, turned off the lights, and climbed under the covers. The room was dark, except for a faint glow from the moon outside. I could see the outline of the trees and the fence in the backyard. Everything seemed normal, and I started to drift off to sleep. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up. I wasn't sure what had woken me, but I had this weird feeling that something wasn't right. I lay there for a few minutes, listening to the silence. It was too quiet. My heart started to race, and I felt a chill run down my spine. I tried to shake it off and closed my eyes, but then I heard a faint sound. It was like a soft tapping coming from the direction of the window. I opened my eyes and looked over, but I couldn't see anything in the darkness. The tapping continued, steady and deliberate. My mind raced with possibilities. Maybe it was just a branch hitting the window or an animal outside. But something about it felt off. I got out of bed and slowly walked towards the window. As I got closer, the tapping stopped. I stood there, staring out into the dark backyard, my eyes straining to see any movement. That's when I saw it. A figure standing just outside the window. My heart nearly stopped. It was a person, but I couldn't make out any details because of the shadows. They were just standing there, motionless, looking right at me. I froze, not knowing what to do. My first thought was that it was some kind of prank, but who would be out here in the middle of the night? I took a step back, trying to stay calm. The figure didn't move. It was like they were waiting for something. I slowly backed away from the window and grabbed my phone from the nightstand. My hands were shaking as I dialed Mike's number. He answered groggily after a few rings. "Hey, what's up?" he mumbled. "Mike, there's someone outside the window," I whispered, trying not to panic. "What? Are you sure?" he asked, sounding more awake now. "Yeah, I'm sure. They're just standing there, staring at me." "Stay where you are. I'm coming down," he said, and hung up. I stood there, clutching my phone, my eyes never leaving the window. The figure still hadn't moved. A minute later, I heard Mike coming down the stairs. He burst into the room, holding a baseball bat. "Where?" he whispered, looking around. I pointed to the window. Mike slowly approached it, bat raised, ready to defend us. He peered out into the darkness, but by the time he got there, the figure was gone. "There's no one here," he said, still looking outside. "Are you sure you saw someone?" "I swear, Mike, they were right there," I insisted. We both stood there for a while, staring out the window, but there was no sign of anyone. Eventually, Mike sighed and put the bat down. "Maybe it was just a shadow or something," he said, trying to reassure me. I wanted to believe him, but I knew what I saw. We checked all the doors and windows to make sure they were locked, and then Mike stayed with me in the guest room until I fell asleep. I barely slept that night, my mind racing with what could have happened. The next morning, we went outside to look for any signs of someone being there. We found some footprints in the dirt near the window, but they were too smudged to make out clearly. Mike called the police and they came by to take a look. They didn't find much, just some vague prints and a sense of unease that lingered in the air. The rest of the weekend passed without incident, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. When I finally went home, I felt a mix of relief and lingering fear. I kept thinking about that figure standing at the window and how close they were to getting inside. I don't know who it was or what they wanted, but I'm just glad I was awake to see them. I still have nightmares about that night, and every time I hear a tapping sound, my heart skips a beat. All I know is I had to hide for my life that night, and I hope I never have to go through something like that again. I don't usually remember my dreams, but this one was different. I found myself walking alone down an empty street. It was eerily quiet, and the air felt heavy. Streetlights flickered above me, casting strange shadows. I knew it was a dream, but it felt so real. Every step I took echoed in the silence. Suddenly I noticed a cab idling at the curb. The driver, a shadowy figure I couldn't make out, motioned for me to get in. I hesitated, but something compelled me to approach. As I got closer, I felt a chill run down my spine. The car door opened on its own, and before I knew it, I was inside. The cab started moving. The streets outside seemed familiar, yet distorted, like they were melting and reshaping themselves. I tried to talk to the driver, but he didn't respond. He just kept driving, his face hidden in darkness. My heartbeat quickened as I realized I had no control over what was happening. I was trapped in my dream. I woke up in a cold sweat, my heart pounding. Shaking off the lingering unease, I checked my watch. It was late, and I needed to get home. I called a cab and waited outside my friend's house. When the cab arrived, I got in, feeling a strange sense of déjà vu. The driver looked normal enough, just an ordinary guy. I gave him my address, and we started the journey. But as we drove, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The streets looked normal at first, but soon we were taking turns I didn't recognize. I asked the driver if he was sure he knew the way. He nodded but didn't say anything. His silence was unsettling. I started to feel uneasy. The cab's interior seemed to shrink around me, making it hard to breathe. I glanced at the driver again, trying to see his face, but it was hidden in the shadows. His hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, knuckles white. "Hey, where are we going?" I asked, my voice trembling. He didn't answer. Instead, he took another unfamiliar turn. Panic set in. I reached for my phone to check the GPS, but there was no signal. It was like we were driving through a dead zone. That's when it hit me. This was exactly like my dream. The same dark streets, the same silent driver, the same feeling of being trapped. My heart raced as I tried to make sense of it. I looked out the window, hoping to see something familiar, but everything was distorted, just like in the dream. I had to do something. I couldn't just sit there and let this happen. I leaned forward and tried to talk to the driver again. "Please let me out. I want to get out now." Still no response. The driver's face remained hidden, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. My mind was spinning. Was this some kind of prank? A kidnapping? I didn't know, but I wasn't going to wait to find out. I reached for the door handle, but it wouldn't budge. Locked. My breath came in short, panicked gasps. I had to get out. I looked around for something, anything I could use. My eyes landed on the window. Without thinking, I slammed my elbow into it. Pain shot through my arm, but the glass didn't break. The driver finally reacted. He turned his head slowly, and I caught a glimpse of his face. It was expressionless, almost inhuman. Fear surged through me, and I hit the window again, harder this time. A small crack appeared. I kept hitting it, desperation giving me strength. Finally, the glass shattered. I didn't waste a second. I reached through the broken window and opened the door from the outside. As the cab slowed down for a turn, I threw myself out, rolling onto the pavement. I scrambled to my feet and ran. I didn't look back. I didn't know if the driver was following me, and I didn't care. I just ran. The streets were empty, eerily quiet, and I had no idea where I was. I spotted an alley and ducked into it, hiding behind a dumpster. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it would burst. I stayed there, crouched and shaking for what felt like hours. Eventually, I heard the sound of a car driving slowly down the street. I held my breath, praying it wasn't the cab. The car passed by, and I let out a shaky sigh of relief. I don't know how long I stayed hidden, but I waited until I was sure it was safe. When I finally emerged, I was disoriented and scared, but I managed to find my way to a main road. I flagged down another cab, and this time, I made sure to keep my eyes on the driver the whole way home. I still don't know what happened that night. Was it just a coincidence? A bizarre prank? I'll never know for sure. But one thing's for certain. That night, I had to hide for my life, and I'll never forget it. My brother had gone out of town for a work trip and asked if I could house sit for him. His house is in a quiet suburban neighborhood, you know, one of those places where nothing ever happens. I agreed because why not? It seemed like a peaceful place to get away from the city for a while. The first night was uneventful. I watched some TV, had a few beers, and went to bed early. The next day was pretty much the same. Just me, alone in the house, enjoying the peace and quiet. It was kind of nice, actually. But the second night, things took a turn. I was sitting in the living room around 11 p.m., binge-watching a new series on Netflix. The house was dark except for the glow of the TV. I had all the lights off because I'm one of those people who likes watching TV in the dark. Anyway, I started feeling a little uneasy. You know that feeling you get when you think someone's watching you? Yeah, it was like that. But I shrugged it off, thinking I was just being paranoid. I got up to get another beer from the kitchen. As I walked past the windows, I glanced outside. My brother's house backs onto a small wooded area, so it's pretty dark out there at night. I couldn't see anything, but the uneasy feeling got stronger. I tried to shake it off and went back to the living room. About half an hour later, I saw something out of the corner of my eye. I paused the show and looked around. Nothing. I told myself I was just imagining things, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I decided to check the locks on all the doors and windows, just to be safe. As I was checking the window in the living room, I glanced outside again. That's when I saw him. There was a man standing at the edge of the woods, right behind my brother's backyard. He was just standing there, staring at the house. My heart started pounding. I thought maybe he was a neighbor or someone lost, but something about him didn't seem right. He was just standing there, not moving at all. I turned off the lights in the living room, hoping he wouldn't see me. I watched him for what felt like an eternity, but he didn't move. I grabbed my phone and texted my brother, asking if he knew who this guy might be. He didn't respond right away, and I started to freak out. Then, the man started walking towards the house. Slowly, deliberately. I could feel my heart in my throat. I didn't know what to do. I thought about calling the police, but what would I say? There's a man standing in my brother's backyard? It sounded ridiculous, but as he got closer, I knew I had to do something. I ran to the back door and made sure it was locked. Then, I went to the front door and checked that one too. All the while, I kept an eye on him. He was now at the edge of the patio, just a few feet from the house. Suddenly, he turned and walked around the side of the house, disappearing from my view. I rushed to the kitchen window and saw him moving towards the front yard. My hands were shaking as I tried to think about what to do next. I couldn't just sit there and wait for him to leave, but I also didn't want to confront him. I decided to go upstairs to get a better view of where he was going. My brother's house has a small office with a window that overlooks the front yard. I quietly crept up the stairs and peeked through the blinds. There he was, standing at the front of the house, staring up at the windows. It was like he knew I was watching him. I ducked down, hoping he hadn't seen me. My heart was racing. I grabbed my phone and finally decided to call the police. I tried to keep my voice steady as I explained the situation to the dispatcher. They told me a patrol car would be there as soon as possible and advised me to stay inside and keep the doors locked. As I hung up, I heard a noise downstairs. It sounded like something tapping on the window. I froze, trying to listen. The tapping continued, steady and deliberate. I forced myself to move, creeping down the stairs as quietly as possible. When I reached the bottom, I peeked around the corner into the living room. The man was now at the living room window, tapping on the glass with what looked like a small rock. He was smiling, but there was something sinister about it. My blood ran cold. I backed away, trying to stay out of sight. I didn't know what he wanted or what he would do if he got inside. I felt trapped and helpless. I made my way to the kitchen and grabbed the largest knife I could find. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. The tapping stopped, and I heard footsteps moving around the side of the house again. I prayed the police would get here soon. I checked the back door one more time, making sure it was locked, and then I retreated to the pantry. It was the only place I could think of to hide. I sat in the pantry, knife in hand, heart pounding so loud I was sure he could hear it. I tried to stay as quiet as possible, listening for any sound that might indicate he was trying to get in. Minutes felt like hours. I kept checking my phone, hoping for a message from my brother or an update from the police. Then I heard it, the sound of sirens in the distance. Relief washed over me. I stayed hidden, waiting for the police to arrive. The sirens got louder, and I finally heard the sound of a car pulling up in front of the house. I waited a few more minutes before cautiously coming out of the pantry. I went to the front door and saw the flashing lights of the patrol car. I opened the door, and 2 officers were already on the porch. I explained everything to them, and they immediately started searching the property. They didn't find anyone, but they did see footprints around the house, confirming my story. They told me to stay inside and keep the doors locked, and they would patrol the area for the rest of the night. After they left, I locked all the doors again and sat in the living room, trying to calm down. I didn't sleep at all that night. I kept thinking about the man and why he was there. What did he want? Why was he just staring at the house? The next morning, my brother called me. He apologized for not responding sooner. He had been in a meeting and didn't see my messages until late. I told him everything that happened, and he was shocked. He said he didn't know anyone who would do something like that. I stayed at my brother's house for the rest of the week, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every little noise made me jump. I was constantly checking the windows and doors, making sure they were locked. By the time my brother got back, I was a nervous wreck. I told him I couldn't stay there anymore. He understood and thanked me for house sitting. I left that same day, glad to be going back to the city. It's been a few weeks since it happened, but I still think about it all the time. I keep wondering who that man was and what he wanted. The thought of him standing there watching me still sends chills down my spine. I don't think I'll ever forget that night. Anyway, that's my story. Thanks for reading. I just needed to get it off my chest. Be careful out there, you never know who might be watching.